to have their own armed militias, which today has been transformed into, guess what the armed militia is? The National fucking Guard. It also guarantees that states have the right to name the weapons, to have the same weapons as the federal army. A right in existence today, and it always has been. This is nothing new. The states have the same weapons as the fucking army does. So does the National Guard, which defends us. The state must have the same weapons that the federal army has, and we do. The National Guards have tanks, they have fighter jets, they have bombers, and it's why the National Guard units have been fighting in Iraq since 2002. The Second Amendment guarantees the right of the states to have them. It is also what allowed the states of the Confederacy to have the weapons to fight in the Civil War. It was their right. If you think the amendment gives an individual the right to have those weapons by putting a tank in your fucking backyard, Jed, and keep in mind the entire amendment was written so that it could be diced and sliced with words ignorant to suit someone's purpose. The amendment means what it says. The next line, I love this one. The next line, for those of you who don't know, there are two types of rights enumerated in the Constitution: states' rights and individual rights. As any constitutional scholar will tell you, when the framers were referring to the states' rights, they used the term the people. When they were referring to an individual right, they used the word person. Okay, I'll give you an example. The Fifth Amendment is a good example of this. It begins with the words, no person shall, and lays out guarantees among them, double jeopardy, all that shit, and that no person in a criminal case shall be compelled to be a witness against himself. Once you understand who the framers of this country are referring to when they say the people, which is a collective for the individual states, and not referring to an individual right. Clarence, get off your sister. Listen to this. You need to hear this. It's time to deal with the most misused and misunderstood part of the Second Amendment, the words to keep and bear arms. Okay, now I know you're getting close to your speakers now for this one, right? And I know you're yelling at me because you fucking hate me for it, and I will eventually have a phone hooked up through this fucking computer somehow, and you assholes can call me all you want. The right to bear arms. Unfortunately for President Obama, Lou Dobbs, Joe Lieberman, and the others in Congress and the media who badly and ignorantly misuse the phrase to keep and bear arms, doesn't mean the right of an individual to own a gun. At least not in terms that the framers of this country intended with the Second Amendment. It doesn't mean the right to go hunting or take target practice or shoot an intruder or shoot your mother or your father or shoot the dude next door that's pissing you off because he has a barbecue every fucking Sunday and all the smoke comes into your house. It has nothing to do with an individual's right of self-defense, though it doesn't speak against it either. And it didn't mean the right to strut down the middle of Dodge City wearing 6 guns. If it did, Wyatt Earp would have been able to arrest anyone who did and confiscate their guns. Because Earp banned them from Dodge City, and no one ever accused Wyatt Earp of violating the Constitution, did they? No. First, the term arms meant something very specific to the framers of this country who wrote the Second Amendment in 1789, and it meant the same thing to them as it means now, and that it has meant all through history. The word arms in the Second Amendment means one thing and only one thing. And it doesn't mean the right, for you to have a gun in your house. It means weapons of war, military weapons of war. The right to keep and bear arms means that the Constitution is guaranteeing the states not only the right to have their own militias or military, but to keep their weapons of war. Arms didn't just mean guns, it meant cannon. It didn't mean, at the time it meant swords, bayonets, cannonballs, powder, even warships. Arms meant anything that could be used as a weapon of war, and it guaranteed the right of those Guaranteed the right of the individual states to have any weapons they wished, including the same military weapons as a federal army. That guarantee is made clear in the last clause. And everyone knows there's a big difference between someone who owns a gun and has hair on their chest and wants to be a macho motherfucker with a gun, and someone who is an arms dealer. An arms dealer is in the business of selling military weapons. Joe Bob cooking out and wanting to cause some shit with somebody is just an inbred fucking idiot. However, the meaning of the word arms isn't the only thing that Second Amendment that people get wrong. They also don't know the meaning of the term to bear arms, which also have very specific meaning to the framers in 1789. To bear arms didn't mean to show them off. It didn't mean to go hunting or to use them to defend against a burglar, despite what Lou Dobbs, President Obama, and some constitutionally challenged congressmen think. To bear arms meant only one thing to the framers. It meant to go to war. The right to bear arms. To go to war. Almost sounds like it makes sense, doesn't it? The Founding Fathers in the Second Amendment guaranteed the right of the individual states not only the means, but the right to go to war and defend themselves against the possibility of a future president deciding to become a tyrant and using military force to give himself dictatorial powers, or to defend themselves against a foreign enemy that might invade the shores of New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, fucking Florida. It guaranteed that the states had both the means, the right to keep, and to use them, to bear arms, to defend themselves, without having to depend on an army to do it for them or against a federal army itself if that became necessary to the security of a free state. If the Founding Fathers had intended the Second Amendment to be the right of an individual to own a gun, they would have said so when they fucking did, you morons. The final clause could have been the most important one because it impacts every gun law on the books. The clause says, the right granted to the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. Shall not be infringed. Shall not be infringed means just that. It doesn't mean shall not be infringed except sometimes. Or kinda. Or shall not be infringed unless we want it to be. Or shall not be infringed unless we decide there's a good goddamn reason to infringe upon it. It means the right granted in the Second Amendment cannot be diminished, restricted, reduced, or encroached upon, even in the smallest way. We all know what fringe means and where the fringe is, on the outer edges of something. And the amendment makes clear you cannot encroach upon the right granted in the Second Amendment, even there, on the fringe. The Second Amendment is only about a state's rights to have its own army, and for that army to have weapons it chooses. And the federal government cannot interfere with that right in any way. And that has been the case since 1789. It is never applied to an individual and was never intended to. So quit fucking using it. Stop with, I'm good Second Amendment rights. No, you don't. It has nothing to do with you. If the Second Amendment had anything to do with an individual's right, to own a gun, it would have said so. It would have said, hey, we the people don't infringe upon a individual's rights to own a gun and protect himself. Now, I'm not saying that you don't have that right. I'm saying that this is not what the Second Amendment meant. The NRA knows this, and they know both the infringement clause and the entire amendment has nothing to do with an individual's right to own a gun. They know it. Otherwise, they would have challenged gun laws a long time ago on the grounds that they violated the infringement clause of the Second Amendment. What that means is, they can turn around and sue the government and do everything because, or they would have already, if there were gun laws. Because if they believed that gun laws infringed on the Second Amendment, you could sue for it. It's a violation of the Constitution. New York City's concealed law weapon is a perfect example. You can't carry a concealed gun in New York City unless you're issued a permit by a police department. You know, just the requiring of a permit could certainly be an infringement of the Second Amendment right. Couldn't it? If they require you and say, listen, you have to have a permit to own a gun, they can't do that. They can't do that if it was a Second Amendment right. They can't do it. The fact they can do it states that there is no Second Amendment right for you to own a fucking gun. According to the Constitution, if it related to individuals, you wouldn't have to worry about it. But even more than that, 90% of the people who apply for a permit get rejected. You don't get the permit unless the police department decides, you know, you're not a fucking idiot and you can have one. And they decide most can't. See that? That doesn't sound like a constitutional right to keep and bear arms. That hasn't been infringed upon me. And no one knows this better than New York Giants former star Plaxico Burress, who was arrested, arraigned, and is now looking at a 3-year mandatory jail sentence for accidentally shooting himself in the fucking leg, the frickin' idiot, with a concealed handgun he was carrying without a permit. Now, if it was a constitutional right, how could they persecute him? He didn't shoot anybody, he shot himself, and he was carrying a gun. Burress certainly has the financial means to challenge the law on the constitutional grounds that he has the money to pay good lawyers, but no one has even remotely suggested they will challenge New York City law on the Second Amendment grounds or that the law is a violation of the infringement clause, and for good reason. They would fucking lose. They would lose. They know they would lose. Because they know what the Second Amendment means. They can't say, wow, he's infringing on my Second Amendment rights. They can't do that. They know they can't do it. So that's not what his defense is based on. So the NRA and their very smart lawyers have never brought suit against any state or municipality or against the federal government challenging any restrictive gun law on the grounds that it is unconstitutional and violates the rights granted in the Second Amendment or the infringement clause in particular. Now, if you're thinking, what about the D.C. gun ban and the Supreme Court decision? Even before it had been decided, constitutional experts and lawyers knew it had nothing to do with the Second Amendment. Because D.C. is a special case, and whatever the Supreme Court decision was going to be, it wouldn't impact the Second Amendment debate. D.C. is not a fucking state. D.C. is essentially funded by Congress. They don't even have a say in the election of the president. They stand outside anything that refers to states' rights in the Constitution because it is not a state, and the Second Amendment is a states' rights issue, not an individual rights issue. The D.C. ban against handguns, which Obama was for, before he was against, didn't decide any Second Amendment issues. Now, I'm going to continue on with this tomorrow because we only have 30 minutes. But I encourage you, please leave me some messages. I am on Twitter and every other fucking social network. Leave me some messages. Tell me what you think. Tell me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, which I'm not, okay. But the thing about it is you have to really start thinking about that. Now, we got about 45 seconds here, but let me tell you this. You need to think about what that law means. Why are there gun permits? Why are there anything like that? You know why? Because it's not a Second Amendment right that you fuckers can carry a gun around. Sorry, you just can't. But the thing about it is do I think that you shouldn't carry a gun around? No, if I can, I don't know, blow each other up, I can give a shit. You know, but don't say that you have the right under the Constitution, because you don't. This is the Atheist Agenda on the right to bear arms. We'll pick this up tomorrow at 1 a.m. and we will have some fun with it. And I'm out of here.